Hey everyone, I am Kat B.
And I'm Angel Street.
And we are the hosts of the webcast UFOT.
But we love coffee and UFOs.
Hi, I'm Stephen Bassett, Executive Director of Paradigm Research Group, and I'm a really big supporter of coffee and UFOs.
Welcome back to another episode of Coffee and UFOs, and we have an awesome guest. We have Stephen Bassett joining Coffee and UFOs. Yes, he's been on Paranormal Now, but this is his first time on this podcast. I'm really happy to bring him on. As many of you know, Stephen Bassett is a political activist and executive director of Paradigm Research Group, which was established in July of 1996 by Stephen Bassett himself, a political activist, consultant, advocate in many ways, any way possible for an end to a government-imposed truth embargo of the facts surrounding an extraterrestrial space presence engaging the human race. And, we'll ask Stephen a little bit about that because we hear so much now that maybe this isn't extraterrestrial. Maybe this is something else. So I'd like to get his take on that. Over the past 25 years, Bassett has helped shape the language and chart the course for a major political movement. He has lectured around the world and given over 1,200 radio and television interviews about the implications of disclosure, quote unquote, disclosure. The formal confirmation by heads of state of extraterrestrial presence here on Earth. His advocacy work has been extensively covered by nearly every major news outlet. From 2004 to 2010, Bassett produced 6 exopolitical conferences in the Washington metro area, each accompanied by press events at the National Press Club. In 2013, he produced the Citizen Hearing on Disclosure, which also itself got a lot of press at the National Press Club. This was a mock congressional hearing over 5 days with 6 former members of Congress and 42 witnesses from 10 countries. This was followed in 2015 by a 2-year political initiative that injected the UAP ET issue into the 2016 presidential campaign. And we're not too far from another presidential campaign, Steve. Welcome.
Good to be with you, Alan. No, we're 20, I think, how many days? Let's see, it's 11, 19 days away.
Yeah, for another election cycle. And then a couple more years, and it's the big one. Now, I want to backtrack a little bit on what's happened over the past year. But what is your prediction right now for the political handing over of power related to disclosure?
Handing over of power.
Transfer of power. What do you expect? What do you anticipate?
Well, in terms of this issue transcends politics and parties and even elections, but the political realities in the United States are important in terms of the process proceeding and getting to where it has to go, which is disclosure, capital D, confirmation. And that confirmation, formal, can only come from one person, the person that lives in that building behind me, the White House. Can't come from some low-level person at the Department of Defense or some colonel in the Air Force. It can only come from the president. And that's where we're headed. That's the goal of the activist movement, always has been. But that process is affected by all the events going on. Now, one of the events that we're dealing with is the election. And in that context, and we'll backtrack on this, but the next thing that's supposed to happen on this issue, by and large, is hearings. And we've already had one introductory hearing to a subcommittee in the House, but the big ones are coming, and the big ones will be witnesses, military witnesses, and they'll be before the top committees, and the 2 top committees are the Senate and House Intel.
So you believe a big one is coming?
Yeah. The big one, well, there'll be more than one, but the one that matters, that really will get things going, will occur before a House and Senate Intel Committee, depending on who chooses to go first. And there will be witnesses testifying. These witnesses will be already interviewed in advance. They'll know their basic testimony before they go in front of the cameras, which is standard. But then they will give you that testimony again under oath to the committee members with the public watching, probably in great numbers, which doesn't mean they couldn't deviate. But of course, there will be questions. And so we will have a process which the American people are quite familiar with, in which they're learning information in a very highly credible way, particularly credible in this case, because the testimony is going to be military people, all of who took an oath before they signed up to serve, and who would be taking another oath when they sit down at the committee table. And more importantly, military people, which is not always the case with civilians, their history, their background, their careers are all completely known and documented, and so there's no mystery there. This is the big hearing that we're waiting for. There will be more than one, and that's what I think will happen next. Now, which brings us to the election.
Right.
We've had a lot of progress on this issue. It hasn't been as fast as some people want. It's been pretty impressive to me. Things could have definitely happened sooner, but these have been some unusual times. We know about that. But as of right now, the next hearing certainly is not going to take place before the election. That's a given. Okay, so the question is, will it take place after the election? Because it could be called at any time. And there's been hints that that's in the works. So let's look at the dynamics here. If the Republican Party wins the House and Senate, and so essentially you're having a change of leadership to both houses.
Right.
That means that the Republicans will have the committee chairs as of January 3-4. So if I'm Adam Schiff, if I'm Mark Warner, if I'm the chair of any of the important committees, I am thinking to myself, if we don't get these hearings going about this hugely important issue that's attracting an enormous amount of attention, in spite of everything else, then it's the chairmanships are going to pass to the Republicans, and they'll hold the hearings and they'll get the glory, right?
Okay, so it's inconsequential who is in charge, right? Who's got
long term, it's inconsequential, but in terms of whether we have hearings after the election, because there's this window between November the 8th and January 3, where whatever the election results, the current Congress is in session. It's still the same Congress. And so the committee chairs will not change. And if the Republicans win those houses, if they do not hold hearings in that roughly 60-day period, then they will not be chairing, nor can they call for hearings after January 3. And so now it's the Republicans' game. And there's a lot at stake here. I think most people agree this is a hugely significant thing, one of the most important political events in history, which is one of the reasons why it's being engaged now by one politician after another. They want to be part of this. They know how big it is. Yeah. And so I would make the case there's an excellent chance that you will see hearings in that period. Get them going. So even when the Republicans take over, the Democrats will have had their say. They will have had their participation in this process. They will have set the table, right? And historically, that will be favorable to them. Now, what if the Republicans just win one house and not the other? It's basically the same thing, except that the committee chairs of the House that's about to change leadership, I think, are motivated to have those hearings. The House is not this changing leadership. They may not make a move. Well, I think either way, we get hearings, I think, under those circumstances.
Is it fair to say up until this point that it really has been bipartisan? I mean, it's not just the Democrats that have been pushing this forward.
No, it is bipartisan, which is great. But not bipartisan enough that you're going to try to throw a hearing into the last couple of weeks leading up to the election. They're quite busy. But while the issue is bipartisan, the nature of the process is that one party, at least initially, is going to get a much bigger piece of the glory than the other. Now, it's not too big a piece. The difference is not great. the fact is that particularly in the intel committees, the chairs are almost like co-chairs, Republican and Democrat, though one party clearly has the chair. And of course, all of the committee members, both parties, will be asking key questions with the big audience watching and so forth. The hearings will accrue significant history to both. Still, the party committee chair and the party that calls the hearing, that's historically significant, and chairs the hearing, historically significant. So it's hard to imagine them saying, look, why bother? We'll just pass the ball to Republicans and they'll do it. No, they have an opportunity in that 60-day period to get things going. In that 60 days, they could hold 3 or 4 hearings on this subject in front of these committees. I assure you, there are scores of witnesses that will come immediately to be on those, to be witnesses, even if they have to pay their own way. They won't have any problem getting witnesses. And so this is what I expect. That's what's likely to happen.
Well, it's not. Would you say it's a fair comparison as far as political points go to those who are latching on now to, oh yeah, I support marijuana? Is it in that same sort of category where we're starting to see this shift, like, oh, this is a good thing to have?
Well, we're seeing a number of shifts, but this issue and what's going on is 1,000 times more important than marijuana. Not that I'm knocking marijuana, saying.
But I mean, as far as response to from the constituents and the public. Is it
again the marijuana legislation and changes that seem to be afoot? There is definitely a political divide on that. We know that. We know the Republicans are much stronger on that issue in terms of not legalizing it. So it's partisan, but there is a substantial number of people that support it. The ET issue is almost completely nonpartisan.
Okay,
that's one of the points I'm going to make in our little chat. That's and one of the reasons why I believe that disclosure is going to happen and the process underway is going to continue unabated. But again, the point I'm making there in terms of the election, that's the dynamic. And then the one I left out was if the Democrats retain both House and Senate, it's possible that they would feel, well, we're going to be able to call the hearings after the first of the year, so let's focus on other things in the end of the year. Now, the problem there is the pressure is growing weekly on Congress to continue the actions that it's initiated. People are paying more attention than ever, and we can go into that. And so delaying it 2 months just because, well, we can do it next year, that's not going to go over well with the public. They're going to take some heat on that. All right. And then secondly, the first month or so in a new Congress, it's tricky. There's a lot of new members that have got to get into town and get set up. They've got to feel their way around, get acclimated, learn the ropes and so forth. The committees have to be reassigned. Sure. It's a busy time. And so it might delay hearings well into, I don't know, March. And I just don't think the public accepts that. So I'm still thinking between November 8 and January 3.
Okay. I mean, like you said, if there is a change of guard to some degree, if you have, let's say, certain Christian fundamentalists and others that simply don't think it's important, don't believe it, just want to focus on other hot button issues, that could slow that process down, because there are certain Christian fundamentalists in particular that literally see this as a demonic presence, that this is something evil, the alleged UFOs and ETs. And we're seeing some of those people, come up into, running for office. So I'm a little concerned about where the shift might occur there.
I'll be candid. I think that, quote, Christian fundamentalism has next to zero impact on the situation now.
Okay, good.
It's completely irrelevant.
Okay.
There are some Christian fundamentalists running for office. Not a single one of them has raised the UAP issue. In fact, the UAP issue hasn't turned up anywhere. All right. And the most notable instance of this is in the race in Florida for Senate between Rubio and the woman's name escapes me. I should know it, but I can easily find it. There's a very close race.
Christine
Rubio.
Sorry. Yeah.
You know that name? The name of the woman that's running against Rubio?
No,
It's okay. He's the one that initiated the legislation process that's now 3 years underway. Bold move, brilliant move. I applaud him for it. He put the language in the Senate Appropriations Bill 2021. That language was already in play in July of 2020. And this is a close election. A lot's at stake, but the opposition has not brought up Rubio's actions with respect to this phenomena at all, period. This is all you need to know about the fact that, one, it's a nonpartisan issue, right? But two, the stigma regarding this issue and phenomena is virtually gone.
Do you really believe that, Steve?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
In the last 5 years, I have linked on my website at paradigmresearchgroup.org in the print media archive about 3,000 articles on the ET-UAP issue. Okay. There's 13,000 altogether. I have been tracking and linking and even saving all of the mainstream English language print articles on this subject with some triaging. There's no fringe stuff. There's odd publications. No, right? It's all legitimate journalistic venues, some of them very high end. And it's been 3,000 articles. These 3,000 articles are virtually completely bereft of stigma it's not there. There are a couple where there's a little light skepticism, right? A couple out of 3,000. Now there's some wild, silly skepticism turning up in fringe stuff, and maybe in Twitter, but that's not what's important. What's important is how is the mainstream journalism now covering this issue? The quality of the articles is better than it's ever been. The depth is better than it's ever been. The number of articles by powerful papers like the New York Times and Washington Post, unprecedented. And there's virtually no stigma. There's no stigma with respect to the politicians coming forward, with respect to the legislation, no stigma with respect to comments anymore from the DOD. It is basically gone. There are a lot of reasons for that. One reason is that we finally got off of UFO and into UAP. We needed a new acronym because the old acronym had essentially become poisoned. All right. And so that's okay. That's all right. And when I say get off of it, I mean, we provided an alternative. It took some effort and work, but it was intentional. We provided an alternative for members of Congress and staff members at the DOD and journalists to refer to the issue other than UFOs. Did that mean UFO is going to disappear? No. It just meant that it was extremely important that journalists be able to have another acronym. Because once UFO was stigmatized by the government, which, by the way, has been taking place for 7 decades. I mean, this term has been poisoned for 70 years. Okay, it's taken some serious hits. It is central to the public engagement of the issue. I know that the public needed something to refer to the issue, and that's what they had. And that's in terms of the public engagement. Said okay. The question is, how is the government going to refer to it? Well, once the government poisoned that term, we had to come up with another one. And so the term is UAP, all right, in the legislation, in the news articles, and so forth. And that's important. All right, but much more has happened. All of the work of thousands of people for all of these decades, and particularly the efforts since December of 2017, have taken this issue across the Rubicon into the promised land. And we find it took a long time to get there, and we got there, and everybody deserves credit going all the way back to Tom Keogh. All right. But we are where we are, and where we are is the stigma is gone. And so because the stigma is gone and the issue is true and nonpartisan, there is nothing to be gained by a candidate for Senate or House raising their hand and going, well, you don't want to elect this person. They think there's ETs here, or they believe in UFOs. No, because the public has pretty much made it clear. Yeah, we're pretty sure it's true. And if we're not sure, we're leaning that way. But we know there's something going on. And so what's your point about this member or candidate trying to address this issue? It's not happening.
Yeah, but that's
So
the thing.
this is
You're
very significant.
saying that we've crossed the Rubicon. We've crossed one Rubicon because, yes, you can say UAP, but a lot of those discussions do not correlate that directly to ET. And as long as that is kept out of the conversation, it seems like a safe place, right?
Well, that gets us to a whole nother
Yeah.
very important
Well,
point.
and before we go there, Stephen, and this is, I think, related to what you were just talking about, because stigma, perception, and how the media represents the UAP or UFO phenomena
Mhm.
is reflected in a lot of different ways. And then you get reactions. Now, you were just saying there's 3,000 some articles that you've collected that, were non-dismissive and seemed to take the subject seriously, or did take the subject seriously.
Very seriously.
But then you have this other lane and other lanes. And I'll just give you this example because I saw this on Twitter a couple of days ago. So this is an article from Movie Nation. It says the title is Documentary Review, More, quote, Proof of a UFO Encounter Does Nothing of the Sort. And they're referring to James Fox's moment of contact. And it says there is no concrete evidence of what happened in Varina, Brazil, caused by an alien spacecraft. It goes on to say, at one point, the producer of UFO's 50 Years of Denial, the director of I Know What I Saw, and the slightly more credible The Phenomena, walks away from one more credulous, zero skepticism interview and gushes, I didn't believe this event really happened when I first came here, but now, end quote. It says two miracles can be associated with that moment and that line. One is that Fox's nose didn't grow and sprout Pinocchio leaves. The other is that I was able to get my eyes to return to normal from rolling that far back in my head. And then towards the end of the article, it refers to him as a huckster. And that stuff gets a lot of traction, and that has to
really?
be part of.
You really think so? You really think so? Let me be clear. That article and that publication is so irrelevant to the process going on.
I'm not
it
denying
has
that.
absolutely zero impact. In other words, a dispute over a particular case, whether is it a good case, a bad case, how is it handled in the movie, in a movie publication, compared to the legislative process underway and the massive infrastructure being set up at the DOD, is the equivalent of a gnat on an elephant's backside. And I have to point that out because I understand that this process is going to be messy and complicated, and there is a huge amount of public interest, and everybody can have an opinion now. There's thousands of limited publications and what have you, and thousands of podcasts. So the idea that everybody is going to be on board is, of course, not the case. But I assure you, when the civil rights movement was approaching its summum bonum, its goal, its prize, which was the Civil Rights Acts of 64, 68, I think. There were plenty of people right up to the day that things were signed that were saying, oh, no, this is terrible. You can't do this. This is a mistake, blah, blah, blah. Obviously, their opinions didn't matter. And so as an activist, my job is to inform the people about the process underway.
Yes.
And where it's at. And not to necessarily to talk about the major forces underway that are shaping this process, because that's ultimately going to determine the outcome. And the hundreds of thousands of other little threads and things going on out there, they'll continue.
Yeah.
And that's fine. And they will even continue after we get the confirmation of the ET presence. That's never going to go away. The problem, though, is really, well, the issue really, without getting into the nuances of any case, is extremely simple. People think it's about science, like quantum mechanics, and it's so hard to understand. No, it's not. It's trivial. The entire issue from day one was, are there ETs here or not? Are you sitting in that chair right now in your office studio or not? I don't need to do any quantum mechanics to confirm that. That's always been what it was. And the evidence for them being here, just that, is overwhelming. Now, the evidence for how their craft work, obviously, that's much less of that and a lot more to learn. But are they here or not? Disclosure is nothing more than the confirmation that they are here.
Well, so that's the question.
Yeah.
Well, that's the question, is how does, like what I was referring to here as an example, how does that play into the equation? Because it's different now. It's not just major media outlets. A piece like this, even if it's a small, online magazine, that gets shared on Twitter, repeated on Facebook, and people get their news, believe it or not, that way.
I understand that there's a love affair going on with Twitter and Facebook, and there are people that have TikTok videos that they do in their kitchen that have 1 million followers. I get that.
Mm-hmm.
But we're kind of losing perspective in the age of social media.
Well, that's my question to you is, so where's it, like, who's losing the perspective, right? Is it the people who are getting caught up in that, or are the people who are not caught up in that, looking at this and going, oh, this is a subject I shouldn't touch?
All right, let me see. What we're dealing with, what I'm dealing with,
mm-hmm.
is very high level things. Now, what I mean by that, high level, like in what is our policy towards Ukraine and Russia and China? Mm-hmm. What is, how are we going to deal with nuclear proliferation? And what would be our response to a tactical nuke? Go to war, don't go to war. The ET issue is at that level.
Yeah.
And it is being dealt with at that level. All right. And so let's assume that the United States has to make a decision about whether it's going to alter its policy with respect to Ukraine, mm-hmm. and actually try to join with NATO to create a no-fly zone over the Ukraine, which would have huge implications. That decision will be made in consultation between the White House and the Pentagon, as well as certain key members of Congress, key leaders, because that's a hugely important decision to be made. And all of the things that are flying around in the Twitter world, in the Facebook world, and TikTok, and all of the podcasts, and all the little things that are happening, mm-hmm. where people are getting information here and there and whatever, mm-hmm. will be basically irrelevant. Again, I'm not demeaning them. I'm simply saying, look, this is serious business being handled at a serious level. And so you've got to look at the process at the level that it's operating, not at what's happening on Twitter on Monday versus Tuesday. And by the way, the media that I'm referring to, that I'm talking about, that I'm chronicling, if you were to go online and you were to look at the page views for the high-end media, the major publications, particularly in the UK, Independence, The Star, the Daily News, right? And then, of course, Drudge Report, New York Times, Washington Post, and you looked at the number of page views, they are in the billions. And so aside from all of the wonderful social media that has our attention now, the major news entities operating in this world are still having the massively more significant engagement by the public, with billions of page views on the content of these platforms. And so our love affair with social media is okay, and it's fun. And I tell you, I spend too much on it, but I do use it. It has activist value, there's no question. And I'd love to have another 100,000 Twitter followers, and I think early next year I will.
What's your handle,
yeah.
Steve? What's your handle? Your Twitter handle?
My Twitter handle is @SteveBassett.
There you go. All right, everybody follow @Steve Bassett.
And the name is Paradigm Research. It's Paradigm Research Group @Steve Bassett. So both. But again, the point I'm trying to make is that we've entered the big time now. All right. It's like the I was watching before the National League Division Series or American League Division Series. Mm-hmm. There's huge amounts of social media out there about the baseball and the players and this and that and controversials and all this, and people have their opinions and everything, and they go back and forth, and there's podcasts for baseball and blah, 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 blah. But now in terms of who's going to win the game, that's about none of that. It's about what's happening on that field by the professional ball players who've spent their whole life leading up to this point and how they play the game. And so right now, the process underway, the disclosure process underway, think of it as the World Series of the phenomena of the issue. That's where we're at. and it's going to, and the outcome is going to be whether we get disclosure or don't get disclosure. Now,
So, if we make an analogy as a takeaway, tell me if this is wrong. So, if UAP disclosure on the,
ET disclosure,
disclosure is the major league, is the World Series, then these kind of little, I don't want to call this a hit piece. If they think they're being critical, they're being rude or whatever, but this kind of conversation is the kids down the block on your street having a pickup game. Is that what it is?
The issue is got all. There's huge history to this issue and huge amount of information out there, and all of it is needs to be sorted out, and it's been dealt with as best we could without resources under a truth embargo the government spent a fortune to maintain. But we know this about that case and this about this case. And those are still being debated. I happen to think in the post-disclosure world, there will be so much more attention to all of the history. Serious money is going to be spent, and we'll sort a lot of this out, and we'll figure out which cases maybe will hold up and some won't. But again, all of that is spread across the entire history of the issue. I assure you, whether or not Varinia is a legitimate ET case or not is irrelevant to the issue of whether ETs are here. And the disclosure and what's going on in Congress is about the issue of ETs are here or not. It's not about whether Varinia was ET case or the Ruha case was ET or Roswell was real, though it absolutely was. It's not about that. It's about the fact that the collective evidence has long confirmed we have an extraterrestrial presence. The details about which evidence is the most powerful, debate that all day long. The point is there's overwhelming evidence. And so those that want to continue to debate this point, that point, whatever, they're welcome to do so. Yep. But we have confirmation, evidence that confirming the ET presence. What we don't have is the government's confirmation of that. The government has deliberately tried to stay away from that confirmation. It has prevented that, just as the government tries to stay away from a lot of things that we wish that they would pay attention to, such as legalizing marijuana or 1,000 other things. All right. In this case, what's at stake is bigger than anything else I have ever seen in my lifetime. The confirmation of the ET presence will be the most profound event in human history, the most profound political action in human history. The implications of it will transcend anything else in human history. All right. That's and because it is so profound is one of the reasons that it has been difficult for the United States government and its allies, as well as the autocratic nations such as China and the Soviet Union, Russia, to take a step on this. It's so big that I think their position was, we're not ready yet. We can't handle this yet. We don't know what's going to happen yet. This is so huge. And we know that governments, particularly our government, can procrastinate for decades about stuff that's really not that big a deal and should get done. But oh no, we'll just put it off. So it should hardly surprise us that they've been struggling with finally closing the deal on the issue of this magnitude. But the fact is, that is what's about to happen. All right.
Well, thank you for sharing your opinion on Twitter and social media, because on this show, I don't want to bring those Twitter fights and that topic to this podcast, but I did want to hear your particular take on that and how it relates to disclosure at large, which I think you made very clear, which is awesome. So then you were leading up earlier to ET, right? And why do you think it's ET, an extraterrestrial presence?
Again, we have a presence here, non-human presence. I don't care whether they're from another planet, the future, another dimension, or the inner Earth. It doesn't matter as far as the disclosure process. They are here. They have advanced technology. They are not human, and we are being denied that simple, fundamental truth, right? Just the truth that they're here. We've gotten the government to a point where it's publicly willing to acknowledge that there is a phenomena, and it does not appear to be of human origin. But that's and I'll get back to that a little bit later, because what's actually going on now is pretty clever and important, but it's confusing a lot of people. But I want to get to that. All right. But so, all right. Let me do it this way. This is what we've got to get done, because I know we only have an hour. here is the situation right now. All right. For those that are confused, new to this, or certainly very much interested, this is my assessment. All I do is assess this. All I do is watch this. I don't do anything else, right? I'm based in Washington, D.C., 2 blocks from the White House, actually only about 10 feet from the White House. And so
it seems.
Take my view for what it's worth. First, more has happened in the last 5 years regarding this issue and the disclosure process than in the previous 70 years. All right. 2, in terms of major media, politicians, people at the Pentagon, or throughout government and the agencies, the stigma on the UFO issue, UAP issue now, is gone. It's almost not measurable. It doesn't mean there aren't people in government that don't believe it.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that there aren't people that in the government that believe it, but absolutely think we should never be told this. What I mean by that is that you can speak on this issue. You can address this issue. You can do it in journalism and in front of cameras. You can do it in the halls of Congress, and you're not going to be slapped down or laughed at or anything else. The stigma is gone. It's now in play. All right. 3, the 2 major things that have happened since the New York Times article of December 2017 is, for the first time ever, we've had full-scale legislative engagement by both houses of Congress. And there have been 2 rounds of legislation, and a 3rd round will be signed after the election. The 2021 appropriations bill, 22 appropriations bill, and now coming the 23 appropriations bill. And all of them contained language about this issue. They called for actions by the DOD, et cetera, right? And a little bit later, I'll talk about what's important in the current bill that's going to be signed after the election. It's pretty significant, okay? We have had countless numbers of high-level people, including several former directors of the CIA, head of Homeland Security, and others, come forward and speak to the issue without any ridicule and actually say that there's clearly something here. Some have said it's not human, and so forth. We've had major articles in all of the major papers, English language, and of course, plenty of foreign language papers. I just can't track those. All right. We've had witnesses come forward. We've had the emergence of a whole alternative media, the podcast revolution, I like to call it. And the number of podcasts that are addressing this issue is a great number, and it's growing all the time, such as yours. And so that's important too. That has been significant development in the last 5 years as well. So all of this has taken us to a place where we have never been before. And so far, the politicians that have stepped into the issue with vigor include Marco Rubio, who ran for president, a Republican, Kirsten Gillibrand, who ran for president, a Democrat, Ruben Gallego, right? Mike Gallagher, a Republican, Gallego's a Democrat, right? Adam Schiff, Democrat, chairman of the House Intel Committee, Mark Warner, the chairman, Democratic chairman of the Senate Intel Committee, and another congressperson by the name of Tim Burchett, who is not on any of the committees that have been briefed on the subject. Oh, by the way, the other thing that's been happening since 2017, which got underway in 2019, there have been an unknown but fairly large number of briefings that have taken place on the Hill, or rather to members of Congress, privately, off camera, no press releases, preparing them and giving them information leading to the development of legislation and the public hearings. Scores and scores of them. Almost all of these briefings have concentrated on the members of the House and Senate Intel and House and Senate Armed Services Committee, which is still a substantial number of members of Congress, of the 535 members. And so, so they had already received a lot of information from witnesses and other people that were brought on the Hill. The principal orchestrator of this was Christopher Mellon. Before they started getting the briefings from the Congress as requested in the 2021 appropriations bill, the Rubio language, and which they then brought a report to the public and to the Congress in July, or that period between March and July of 2021. So and these were classified briefings. And so a lot of members of Congress right now are sitting on collectively more knowledge than probably the Congress has ever had before. Many of them already knew there was an extraterrestrial presence because they're not stupid and they have connections. Mm-hmm. Many of them had it confirmed for them in these briefings. So that's in place behind the legislation that's going forward. Mm-hmm. But the reason I bring up Bassett is he's kind of an interesting example. Bassett is a very conservative Republican who is running for Congress. I think his seat is safe. But he is the lone example right now that I know of somebody who did not get the private briefings, is not on any of the committees that are really in play, Intel, Homeland Security, Armed Services, so forth. But he asked around, he's talking to his colleagues that are on this committee, what's going on and whatever. And he got enough info from them to realize, hey, this is a big deal and I want in. And so Tim Bassett jumps in with both feet, right? Prior to the hearing on May 15th, he goes on One Nation, it's a new journalistic platform. It's conservative. And gentleman was Vittert, I believe, is the host, and he's being interviewed by Vittert, and basically comes out and says there's an extraterrestrial presence here, right? Boom, there it is, right? Congressman saying that. And then he goes to the hearing and makes sure that he's around on that May 15th hearing afterwards for the press to interview him, and he says some more stuff. And since then, he's doubled down again. I think he gave an interview to Tucker Carlson. So here is an example of a member of Congress who was not part of the major process underway, which is leading to disclosure, that has figured out this is the biggest political event of all time, and I want to be part of it. Let me tell you, there are going to be more Tim Bassetts very soon. They're going to be competing with each other to see who can get out in front of this issue. Even if they're not going to be in any of the hearings, they don't need to be potted plants sitting on the sidelines. And so they're going to be jumping in, not concerned about stigma, not concerned about being embarrassed, but viewing it as a positive thing in terms of their electability. We have never been remotely close to this since 1947. That is what's going on. Now, let me bring you to the really interesting part.
Sure. Yeah.
Here is the conundrum that they're trying to solve, which is creating all the cognitive dissonance out there and the people who know a lot about this issue. And to some degree, people that are new to the issue, but very interested. And this includes all the millennials, right, who were born after the Cold War. And they don't know who J. Allen Hynek is, but they're smart and they watch lots of podcasts and they're starting to figure out something's going on. Mm-hmm. Here is the deal. And must state this slowly so there's no misunderstanding. The United States government, including those within Congress, the executive branch, the Department of Defense, and the military, who had a need to know, have known about the extraterrestrial presence since 1947. Period. Right? Doesn't mean everybody, but it means those that need to know. So you've got that confirmation spread out amongst certain people within all of these agencies. So think about that. They've known all along.
Do you think that they might have known even earlier, actually, than 1940?
There's a possibility, but 47 is enough for my point.
Undoubtedly, sure.
Right? Okay. Now, certainly the number that knew grew after Roswell. I mean, but there were some people that knew before 47, July 47, but it was a much smaller number. After Roswell, obviously expanded.
Okay, yeah, because I mean, Paula Harris and Jacques Vallée make a pretty good case for a 1945 crash in San Antonio. Yeah.
There's also a case at Cape Girardeau, I believe.
Or Aztec, sure, yeah.
Yeah, okay. Point number 2. The United States government has been investigating, tracking, researching, and dealing with the UAP issue since 1947 in fully classified programs, highly classified programs without let up. They haven't taken any years off, any months off. They have been dealing with this issue, and there is a vast amount of knowledge, reports, studies, and everything else in USAP programs, absolutely out of touch from us of the press. And that has been going on solidly for 75 years. Okay.
It's amazing how many people went to their graves with that secret.
Sure. Well, it was a national security matter, and the vast majority of people that work for our government take it seriously and honor their oaths and so forth. And it shouldn't shock anybody. Okay. So that's interesting. All right. So if that is the case, what in the hell is going on now? Okay. Because starting in December of 2017, you had a group of people turn up on the scene. You had some information brought forward. You had some extraordinary articles in the New York Times. And suddenly this issue comes out and is in play in a big way. And clearly it's going to start moving forward. And as it moves forward, it was clear to people such as myself that one, they were going to focus on the modern era. They're not going to go back in the past. They're going to start like from 2004, just because that was the Nimitz case, and that was the case that they really centered some of their initial releases on. And so 2004 forward, there's plenty there, and more than enough to deal with what they're trying to do. They don't want to get back into all of the huge history of this issue going back to Roswell. They don't need that, and they can't deal with that. So it's like it just started happening. All right. And then secondly, as the process moves forward, they're clearly staying. They're like a soccer team. They're going to play soccer, but they can't step out of bounds. There are rules they have to follow, or the goal doesn't count. Right. Or a football team, same thing. And they're following these rules. And one of the rules was, as we move forward on this issue, we're going to be talking about UAP, not ET. Now, when I say talking about it, in other words, the focus, the center, the emphasis is on UAP, unidentified phenomena.
So that's rule number one.
And what we need to do about that, since clearly there's something there. Okay. And clearly there's something there is based upon what was released to the New York Times, the gun camera footage and what have you. For obviously people such as myself and all of my colleagues knew there was something there before 2017 and know about the history going back to 1947. But that's fine. But for what they were trying to do, the group that came forward, particularly the two key people, Elizondo and Mellon, was to get the issue resolved. In other words, what was at the heart of what happened there, regardless of what the intentions or long-term goals of the various people were, at the core of it, which really was Mellon and Elizondo, was resolving this issue. And resolving this issue means getting confirmation of the ET presence. Not finally proving that, in fact, it's not real at all. And so now we put it to bed. We don't have to worry about it anymore. No, of course not. It was to get disclosure. Okay.
So in a way, it's like by that cutoff of 2004, all that stuff before has been made into movies and fictional books and video games and event spaces and candy and T-shirts and all this stuff. 2004 forward. What they're able to do then, it seems to me, is set this firmly in a non-fantastical framework. Whereas if they start talking about, let's say, Roswell, now people start Googling online, they're looking up Roswell, and there's just tons of fiction out there.
Well, that's my point.
Here, it's much more dry, which is probably
you're right. Again, they've got to deliver a package, all right. And they can't. The package has got to be manageable, right? You can't try to deliver this whole thing to Congress and the press and somehow result in one. No, they've got to follow a process, and the process has got to work to get disclosure. So one, we'll focus on the modern evidence. It's more recent. There's witnesses alive and so forth. We'll stay away from the ET issue. That's too far. That's a little more than a lot of people can handle yet, particularly some of the members of Congress. Whether or not they know it's true or not, in terms of handling in a public way, more difficult. All right. And we'll move forward this way. And so as they move forward, people start to get irritated because, one, they seem to ignore everything that happened prior to 2004, which was insulting to some. All right. It seemed dismissive. And then The fact that the ET aspect was being pretty much tabled was seemed very disingenuous. Now, from the get-go, I took a different point of view. First of all, I supported the project from the very first day. I knew how important it was. I knew where it was going in my view. And I'm saying, I'm happy with this, right? I know what you're trying to do. I'm perfectly happy, but I knew others were not going to be so happy. And so as they move forward, they're making progress because the plan is working. And it works so well that you got the Congress involved, starting with Rubio and the legislation. Yeah. And that legislation was calling on the DOD to do stuff. Okay. Meaning set up this task force, set up that group, give a report. And that has now evolved over 2 years until it's now a huge deal. There's probably going to be a couple thousand people working in the UAP programs across the agencies being monitored, being run out of the DOD, but cross agency, cross service, a couple thousand people. All right. And that's a good thing. However, as you watch it unfold, it would appear to any reasonable person that the DOD was somehow informed and learned that there's a phenomena here that we really haven't run to ground. And I'm talking 2019, okay, 2020, right? And well, probably we should do something about that. Let's set up a task force over the ONI, right? 2 people in an office and a water cooler, whatever. We'll give a report back to the public. And then we will set up this and we will set up that. But we want to do things. And it looks like, and people are going, okay. But wait a minute. You've known about this for 70 years. So why don't you just come out and tell the Congress privately, yeah, there's ETs here. How can we get this to the public? How can we get the president to announce it? Here is why. They have to play it this way because disclosure has always been a very difficult thing to contemplate and to achieve. And there are a lot of ways it can go badly. And that's not good for anybody. So, and they've been gaming this for years. I can tell you a story about how they spent millions on a public relations contract, classified, with a top firm in DC to just game this whole thing out. Not only game out how to disclose, but game out how to deal with the public's reaction. So the thing is, look, you want it to be orderly. You want it to be politically neutral. You want the DOD agent and other agencies and services to have an opportunity to get on board so that they are involved with the process and not just standing off to the side going, well, we're not cooperating until you come at us with hammers or whatever. No. They have an opportunity to do the right thing. And then you have hearings with the world watching and people under oath giving testimony that's powerful and convincing. And when you have enough of that, the president will be in a very and by the way, and the fundamental platform for these hearings needs to be appropriate. It will be national security, very safe, very appropriate. No one's going to criticize it. A committee chair for thinking that the ET presence is not a national security issue. Of course it is, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And thus it gives the president ability to confirm. This is the responsible way to do it. But unfortunately, in order to do it that way, they have to play by some rules. They have to stay within certain parameters. There are many.
When you say the president will confirm, he'll confirm what?
The ET presence. Just the ET presence. Okay, that's disclosure. That's all disclosure is there's an ET presence. That's it. So Congress
does the groundwork for whomever the president is.
Right.
To take that next step. Okay.
And publicly does. In other words, the transparency is extremely important.
Yeah.
So the public is involved. They're watching it. It's transparent. The Pentagon's involved. Eventually the services will get involved. Obviously the Congress is involved. There's a lot of glory to go around. And at some point the evidence is obvious and worldwide, in a formal way, the president can make their action. That's what this is all about. But the rules of the game are this. The people involved, witnesses, activists, Mellon, Elizondo, members of Congress can't be talking extraterrestrial. They can't be talking about this extraterrestrial presence. That is off the table. They can't be talking about contactees. They need to focus on the fundamental military-based evidence regarding the phenomena and go as far as they can with that. And they've gone pretty far. When they have put out numerous statements that whatever this phenomena is, it's not ours, and it's not our, quote, enemies. That doesn't leave a lot left for it to be, but everybody understands that. And they're constantly being pressured by people in podcasts and on the social media. But what about ETs? And on a number of occasions, and this is notable, both Elizondo and Mellon have gone there a little bit, referred to contactees, right? I don't think it was a slip, but they don't go very far and they don't focus on it. So, but what they are doing by making these occasional references is they're wisely letting the larger community know, look, we're moving towards getting this issue confirmed. All right. But please, we're not unaware of all of this other evidence. We're not unaware of the contact phenomena, but we can't go there yet. That's going to happen after disclosure. And so I came up with a term to describe this rather interesting and somewhat frustrating process, now 2 years on, but possibly resolvable within a few months, as a public relations-driven extrication project. All right? And so what do I mean by that? They're doing all the things that, from a public relations perspective, puts the Congress and the Department of Defense, the military services, and so forth, in the best possible light, gives them a chance to show the flag and participate, and allow the public to be involved, right, in order to get out from this 75-year truth embargo, which is essentially a massive national security lie. And so in many, many instances, they are forced to be mendacious. They can't really say what they know. They deliberately have been misleading in a number of occasions. They struggle. Whenever possible, they may refer, I have an NDA there, or that's classified. But overall, they've had to be mendacious, which is to say they've had to participate in some small lying in order to get out from under the big lie once and for all. Because once the big lie is over, and the confirmation of the ET presence is out of the way, not just for us, but for the entire world, the post-disclosure world begins. And in that world, which starts the day after, frankly, every one of these other issues, every iota of public information, as well as a great deal of government-held information, every case will be looked at with intensity and with resources by academics, by journalists, by the government, by the citizens. And the podcast, UAP podcast revolution, will go into warp speed. All right. And so that is the cognizant dissonance. Okay. They're doing this in a way that needs to be done. And the other way I'll put it, and I'll stop, and we can do some short questions. Maybe I can go to the legislation.
But I have actually just one question left for you. Yeah.
Okay. Is that what they are finally doing? Is doing something they could have done in 1952 and probably should have. In 1952, in July, when you had the multiple flyovers of Washington, D.C., seen by many, many people, it caused a huge amount of ruckus and forced the government to take some actions, and it was very upsetting and embarrassing and what have you. That was the time for them to say, for some members of Congress to step forward and say, look, we want to know more about this. We want some reports. We need some hearings. Let's get into this in a more serious way. That was their opportunity to do it. And if they had, I believe it would have gone just fine. And it would have been extremely well received. And it would have completely changed the course of the second half of the 20th century. Instead, they went the other way. They conducted a panel called the Robertson Panel with the CIA, and came up with the fundamental conclusion that the phenomena doesn't seem to be a threat, but the public's growing interest in it could be a threat. And so we have got to contain, tamp down, control that public interest until we're ready to release it, whenever that is. Turns out it's 75 years on. And so what they finally are doing now is what they should have done at the end of 1952. They are finally creating a public-facing engagement of the issue with all the proper bells and whistles, and legislation and congressional involvement and appropriate media coverage that we've been waiting all these years for, right? They're creating that, and that is what they're putting together. The fact that they already knew about the ET presence long ago is not as important as that this public process be underway. Now, this leads to disclosure. Once you get disclosure, guess, did I act? I think I did something here. Hang on.
No, I think you bumped the camera. There you go. You're back.
Hang on. All right. Again, I don't understand where this blockage is coming from, but I'll settle for that.
Okay, that'll work.
Let me come forward a little bit. It's not that. It's not this.
We'll do that. There we go.
I'll take that. Okay, look.
Okay. And
once we get disclosure, everything else can be engaged. Yep. All of the restraints are off. Okay. And it can be done in a more orderly fashion. And yes, not too long into the post-disclosure world, I don't know how it will take place. The appropriate person or persons will, how would you say, do a little press conference, and they will confirm to us that, yes, we knew all along. All right.
Yeah.
We've known since 1947. We have dealt with the issue in the interest of national security and your interest as best we could during a nuclear proliferation era that still is going on. And we feel we made the best choice. If you're offended, we're sorry. But no, we've known all along. And that gets that out of the way. But because of all this public-facing effort, and because the fact that they're doing it and getting it done, and we're having some time to adjust to it, most people go, okay, fine, we forgive you. Yeah. This is not the Tuskegee experiments. This is a national security decision that on an issue of enormous implication that was withheld. And they did some things which are a little untoward, but nothing compared to what other nations do. And so, we will get that apology or that acknowledgement after disclosure. They won't wait very long. And then we can start fresh. And in other words, it'll like a whole new era, right? Nothing more to hide other than how much information can you release to us and when and so forth. And the issue will have its day. I will be partying a lot. No question about it. I have plans. I have colleagues that I'm going to be hanging out with, and we're going to laugh and have fun and rejoice, right? So that is kind of what's going now.
So that tells me you think, what's the timeline here?
Again, if we can get hearings at the end of the year, the moment the first witnesses turn up in front of an important committee, like an intel committee, some of the nuclear tampering witnesses, some of the pilots, whatever, and under oath confirm what we've already heard about and has been out there for some time, but never under oath in front of Congress with millions of people watching. The public's demand for more of that will just explode. Meaning, okay, more witnesses, more hearings. Okay, they did a hearing in 68 and 66, one day, half a day, and said, okay, we're done here, and then shut down Blue Book. No, that's not going to happen. And so then it's going to pick up speed. And once it gets rolling, it won't take long. I mean, it's just not
5 years, 10 years, 3 years,
weeks. When that first hearing takes place. Wow. And those witnesses like Bob Salas and Fravor and others get in front of that committee and under oath testify to what we already know. The public's going to explode. And there's going to be demands worldwide for more witnesses and more hearings immediately. Okay. And so they'll have another hearing and more witnesses will turn up. Now, let me talk about, let me tie in the legislation that's underway. The current legislation was put into the Senate bill by Warner. It's extensive. It's 3 full sections of the appropriations bill. It incorporates language that was entered into the House bill by Gallego and Gallagher jointly. And so you can find this bill under it's Senate Bill 5403, sections 703, 4, and 5. There's some extraordinary things in this bill. All right. Let me just point out a couple of them. All right. By the way, first let me start with this. The section 3 begins this way. Let me just get to it. Okay. The name of the section, the lead section, is Modification of Requirement for Office to Address Unidentified Aerospace Undersea Phenomena. All right. That's the major title. Okay. Section 1683. Establishment of the Unidentified Aerospace Undersea Phenomena Joint Program Office. Okay.
Let's see where you're going.
Why is that amusing? Well, because that just happens to be the 7th name that has been attached to this issue under the DoD since things came to light back in 2017. The program that first came to light was OSAP, but in fact, what was published was the nickname ATIP, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. But the original program that incorporated the Reed's money and shifted ultimately more to UAP with Elizondo essentially running things was the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program. Once things started to break, and the DoD needed to take action, they set up the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force over the Office of Naval Intelligence. So the first acronym was OSAP, AAWSAP. The second was ATIP, which I kind of liked, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And then Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force, UAPTF, which is basically UAP. All right. But it was just a placeholder. And then the legislation came down.
Kicks in, right.
And in response to that legislation, the DoD set up an office within the DoD where things were going to eventually end up. And they called it the Airborne Object Identification and Management Synchronization Group, or AIMSOG. One of the worst acronyms of all time.
It really is.
And amusing, okay? And so that was in place for a while. But then the next legislation, they changed the name again to All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, AARO. Now, the reason that there's always a reason for these name changes. They're not just screwing with us. In between, after the AIMSOG thing was out there started to become a lot of interest and evidence coming forward about the undersea objects, USOs. And it was, in other words, it was starting to get serious attention and they were getting some real evidence, just like they got with the Nimitz case and so forth. And we've all known about this. This is no shock to the field, but these things can operate underwater a couple of 100 miles an hour, which is more than our submarines. And so they realized that they needed to address all of the phenomena underwater, in the air, and even in space. And so they decided we're going to go with All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office. Fine. That's a good acronym. They should have stuck with it, but they didn't. In the new bill, they're setting up the Unidentified Aerospace Undersea Phenomena Joint Program Office, the UAUPJPO. What the hell? How you pronounce that? I don't know. So that is now the word.
I don't know. Yeah.
UAPJPO. Okay, now this is funny, but let me point out there's a reason for this. This is actually a very good sign, because what you're seeing happening here is that as this thing has gotten underway, the Department of Defense is responding, and they are starting to build out the infrastructure. They're getting more requests from the department, from the Congress about what they want and expect. They already know the kinds of things they have to do. And so the mission statement is growing. More offices are involved and so forth. And they're adjusting the name to try to reflect the expanding status of the program. This is very common with DoD stuff. They keep changing the name as the damn thing gets bigger, and certain entities want it to be acknowledged and they want it to reflect this or that. This will not be the last name of this program, but it is in fact representative of how serious they are about getting this thing, this public-facing effort underway and responsive. All right.
Yeah,
and so
doing it right.
And doing it the right way. Now, in that regard, so that's the first thing you see, right? And so I'll just read a little of the first paragraph. It says, not later than 120 days after the date of the enactment of the Intelligence Authorization Act, which will be a little later this year, the Secretary of Defense, in coordination with the Director of National Intelligence, shall establish an office within a component of the Office of the Secretary of Defense or within a joint organization of the Department of Defense and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
This is significant. What they're saying here, it's very possible this is going to be a joint program, essentially with two huge partners operating out of both places. That is big. I mean,
well, like you said earlier, I mean, we're talking about thousands of people involved now.
Yeah, thousands of people. Okay, so that was kind of notable.
Mm-hmm.
But and then there's section 4, and then they're getting to section 704. Okay, I want to read you some of the most important parts of these bills, and these are incredibly important if you understand their implications. Mm-hmm. In section 704, item 4, section B, item 4, sharing of information. The system established under paragraph 1 shall provide for the immediate sharing with the office personnel and supporting analysts and scientists of information previously prohibited from reporting under any non-disclosure written or oral agreements or other instrumentality or means, except in cases where the cleared government personnel administering such system conclude that the preponderance of the information available regarding the reporting indicates that the observed object and associated events and activities likely relate to a special access program or compartmented access program that, as of the date of the reporting, has been explicitly and clearly reported to the Congressional Defense Committee and Congressional Intelligence Committee and is documented as meeting those criteria. Let me translate that for you. What that says is that they are providing for the sharing of information regarding UAPs, not the sharing of information regarding non-UAPs, meaning our stuff.
Right.
In other words, don't waste your time reporting about our stuff that might turn up here or there and somebody doesn't understand it. Mm-hmm. We're only interested in reporting and sharing the information about the stuff that isn't ours, that isn't part of one of our programs. All right. That's very, very important. Okay. Now I'm going to drop down a little bit more. Okay. Under section C, records of non-disclosure agreements. Now listen to this very carefully because it's really important. Identification of non-disclosure agreements. The Secretary of Defense, the Director of National Intelligence, the Secretary of Homeland Security, the heads of such other departments and agencies of the federal government that have supported investigations of the types of events covered by subparagraph A of subsection B1, just talked about that, and activities and programs described in subparagraph B of such subsection, and contractors of the federal government supporting such activities and programs shall conduct comprehensive searches of all records relating to non-disclosure orders or agreements or other obligations relating to the types of events described in subsection A, and provide copies of all relevant documents to the office.
So this applies to special access programs.
What they're saying here is we want copies that we can review of all of the non-disclosure and other agreements that are preventing people from speaking to this issue.
That's huge.
Going back to 1947.
That indicates intent here, which is extraordinary.
Oh my God! Yes. Okay,
so Steve, we only have a few minutes left. Do you want to hit us with one more before?
Yeah, and then there's another here. Here's will be the last one. It's also very important. Sure. This is very important. In section D, protection from liability and private right of action. Protection from private liability. It shall not be a violation of any law, and no cause of action shall lie or be maintained in any court or other tribunal against any person for reporting any information through and in compliance with the system established pursuant to subsection B and 1. Section 2, an employee of a federal agency and an employee of a contractor for the federal government who has authority to take direct others or take or direct others to take, recommend or approve any personnel action shall not, with respect to such authority, take or fail to take or threaten to take or fail to take a personnel action, including revocation of suspension of security clearances with respect to any individual as a reprisal for any reporting as described in paragraph 1. And in the section 3, they indicate that that person does have the right to file civil action.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a whistleblower protection section. That is not what it is. It is not an amnesty section. All this is providing the fundamental structure, allowing witnesses to come forward throughout the entire government, including the military services and the DOD and intelligence agencies, regarding things they know about this issue without concern, and to the appropriate people, to their boss, to the Congress, not to the New York Times. This is internal, but if you do that and you do it appropriately, you will have no reprisals against you. It is a witness support effort. And the reason this is critical is that you can't have witnesses before you in a congressional hearing if you don't even know who they are. Right. And so they're encouraging people to come forward so that they could be potential witnesses in the hearings to come. This is legislation that absolutely confirms the intent of everything that's been going on, is to end this truth embargo once and for all, not in 10 years, not in 5 years, maybe in 5 months, or perhaps even in a couple of months. I'm making this as clear as I possibly can. For those that want to go read this bill, decide for yourself. They are serious. They are not fooling around. They're playing it by a set of rules, but they're taking us where we have to go. The end of this truth embargo once and for all.
Steve, can you copy that link? Do you have the link on your computer and send it in the private chat here?
Of course.
Okay, great. Perfect.
Coming your way
I'll
right
share. I'll put that in the description down below so everybody can see that. And just as a reminder, earlier on, we mentioned that we're about 18 days away from the November election. By the time this actually posts, we'll only be a couple of days away from election day.
That's right.
One last question. Is there a scenario in any of this where the Supreme Court plays any kind of role?
No. Fortunately, it's just no. There's not going to be. There's everything that you're happening is pretty straight up. There's been not the slightest indication that anybody's going to try to take some sort of legal action to stop this. This thing is a juggernaut that's rolling forward. You either get on board or you just get rolled over. So I'm not worried about that.
And so a part of the takeaway tonight, which I appreciate very much, is stay out of the muck. There's a lot going on that's very positive, constructive, and I appreciate all your efforts, Steve. If you want to leave us with one thought, what would it be?
The one thing you can do that anybody can do that is probably more helpful than you realize is praise, right? We spend a lot of time telling the government how much we hate them and they don't get that and they don't get that. And we call up our congressman or send them a text or whatever. Here's what you got to do. Contact Schiff, Gillibrand, Rubio, Gallagher, Gallego, Schiff, right? Mark Warner. Tell them how thrilled you are that they're doing this. Hell, send some stuff to the Pentagon and tell them you're thrilled they're setting up this program. Burchett, absolutely. Let them know how much you appreciate what they're doing, how it's the right thing. Praise them. That is the number one thing that will add gasoline that we could use right now. Because you know what people do when they get praised? They go to their other colleagues and tell them how they're being praised, right? Nobody goes and tells their colleagues how they're getting a lot of crap, in their emails. Oh man, you wouldn't believe I'm getting this fantastic email. And you know how that's going to start spreading, right? In other words, we're winning. Let's act like winners. So do all the praising you can in every venue. You can praise them in Twitter. You can praise them in Facebook, TikTok. You can do, they've all got Twitter accounts. Tweet them. Tell them how wonderful they are. Right? They're getting it done, folks. And all of your praise is and avoid the nitpicking, right? Or at least keep it off to the side. Just tell them how fantastic a job they're doing and how you're looking forward to these hearings. So
you're saying we don't really need a 1 million person march on Washington to get this done?
We were never going to have one. This is not the kind of issue that you get that.
All right. Steve, thank you so much.
All righty.
All right, and thank you all for joining us for another episode of Coffee and UFOs. I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did, as always, with Stephen Bassett. If you want to find out more, go to paradigmresearchgroup.org. And as always, please like, comment down below, subscribe. Until next time, live in the mystery.